After Opal passed, my son took over my finances and told me it was to help me through the hard part. I was 61 years old and couldn't see past the end of my own driveway. Then the man who runs the engine repair shop down the block started driving me home after my morning walks. I'd bring him biscuits. He'd hand me coffee without being asked. Then one morning he locked his truck doors before I could get out and said, "Jerome, don't go home yet. There's a rental car parked across from your house again. Third time this week, and I need you to see what I found at the county courthouse yesterday." Follow this story to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far it travels. Opal died on a Wednesday in March. Heart attack fast, the doctors said, which they apparently meant as comfort. She was 59 years old and had been a fourth-grade teacher at Fairview Elementary for 26 years. She had a classroom full of construction paper art and a cabinet full of birthday cards from students she still remembered by name 20 years later. She made biscuits every Sunday morning without measuring anything. She squeezed my hand at the movies even when the movie wasn't scary. I'm Jerome, 61 years old, retired from the U.S. Postal Service after 32 years carrying a route through the neighborhoods east of downtown Anniston, Alabama. I retired 3 years before Opal died, thinking we'd have time. Camping in the Smokies, visiting her sister in Biloxi, taking the trip to Portland she'd been talking about since 2015. We never made it to Portland. That's the part I try not to sit with too long. When she died, our son Bradley flew in from Atlanta within 12 hours. He's 35, works in commercial real estate development, drives a car that costs more than my annual pension. He handled everything, called the funeral home, coordinated with her school district about the life insurance paperwork, sat across from me at the kitchen table with folders and a pen, and walked me through things I don't fully remember signing. I know I signed things. I remember his hand on my shoulder and his voice saying, "Dad, I've got this. You don't have to worry about any of this." I didn't worry about any of it. That's the mistake I made. Not the only one, but the first one. Bradley stayed for 11 days. He organized the reception after the burial, thanked everyone for coming, made sure Opal's car got sold to a couple from the church. He transferred some accounts into a joint setup for easier access if something comes up. He sat down with a lawyer, his own lawyer, who had driven up from Atlanta, and they went through Opal's estate documents while I sat at the table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink. The hospital bills were significant, Bradley told me, and there were coordination fees for the estate process. After everything cleared, the life insurance came out to around $58,000. I put $15,000 in your checking so you're covered for the year, and I've handled the rest responsibly. I remember nodding. $58,000 sounded right to me for a woman who'd spent her whole career in public education. I didn't ask what the rest meant. I didn't ask for an itemized list. I was a man who just buried his wife of 34 years, and my son was telling me he had it under control. Bradley left on a Sunday. He hugged me at the door and said to call if I needed anything. I called twice in the next 2 months. He answered both times on the third ring and moved me off the phone inside of 4 minutes. That was 2 years ago. The engine shop on Meridian Street is called Phelps & Son, though there's no son anymore. Clayton Phelps has run it alone since his father retired in 2009. It's a narrow building with a rolling steel door that stays open from 7 in the morning until 6 at night, the kind of place that smells like machine oil and WD-40, and has a radio playing classic country that you can hear from half a block away. I started walking past it in April, about 6 weeks after the funeral, when my grief counselor at the VA, I'm a veteran, 2 years Army in my 20s, suggested I get outside every morning for at least 30 minutes. I'd walk east on Meridian, loop back on Pine Street, 2 miles, 40 minutes. I started stopping at the shop somewhere around week 3. Clayton Phelps is 58, broad-shouldered, with the kind of permanently grease-stained hands that don't fully come clean no matter how long he scrubs. He fixes small engines, lawn mowers, portable generators, air compressors, and he has a coffee in the back of the shop that's probably as old as my retirement. The first morning he offered me a cup, I almost kept walking. But it was cold and I hadn't spoken to anyone since the Sunday before, so I said yes. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. The Braves bullpen, the pothole situation on Route 21, whether the diner on 4th Street had gotten worse or whether we'd just gotten older. He didn't ask about Opal. He didn't tell me time heals. He just talked to me like a man talking to another man on an ordinary morning, which was exactly what I needed and couldn't have named at the time. I came back the next day and the day after that. By June, I was stopping every weekday. In July, I brought him biscuits, Opal's recipe, buttermilk and self-rising flour and cold butter worked in with your fingers until it looks like coarse sand. They came out crooked, not like hers, but Clayton ate 3 of them without commentary, and when I came back the next Tuesday, he said, "You bring more of those." That became the arrangement. Biscuits on Tuesday, coffee every morning, easy conversation about nothing that needed solving. It was the best part of my days for a long time. The trouble started in September when I got a roofing estimate. The shingles on the south side had been lifting since spring, And after the August storms, I had a slow leak above the second bedroom I'd been managing with a towel and a plastic bin. A contractor I found through the church gave me a number, $16,000 for a full replacement. My pension runs about $2,200 a month. My savings account had roughly $8,000 in it, less than I'd expected, but I'd assumed the medical bills and estate fees Bradley handled had taken a chunk. I called Bradley on a Thursday evening. He answered warmly, asked how I was doing, said he'd been meaning to call. When I explained the roof and mentioned using some of Opal's insurance money, not all of it, just enough to cover what I was short, the warmth left his voice the way heat leaves a room when someone opens a window in December. Dad, I don't think you understand how complicated that money is to access right now. I'm not asking for your money, son. I'm asking about the insurance payout. Those funds were applied to estate costs. There were legal fees, coordination expenses. It all added up faster than you'd expect. $58,000 all added up to nothing? There was a pause, long enough that I heard him exhale. Then his voice shifted into something practiced and level, the voice of a man who has had difficult conversations before and knows how to steer them. Dad, I'm going to be straight with you because that's what you raised me to do. You're 61, living alone in a 4-bedroom house with a leaking roof. That's not a sustainable arrangement for someone in your situation. I've actually been looking into some assisted living communities in the Anniston area that have really strong programs for. I don't have memory problems. I know you don't believe you do, but grief affects cognition in ways people don't always recognize in themselves. Sherry and I have noticed things. He hadn't seen me in over a year. Sherry had never come back after the funeral reception. He said several more things. I stopped registering them after a while. When there was a gap in the words, I said goodnight and hung up. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a long time. My son had just suggested I was losing my mind. My son, who had driven 4 hours from Atlanta the morning Opal died and sat at this same table with a lawyer I had never met and walked me through paperwork I can barely remember. For the first time since the funeral, something other than grief settled into my chest, something harder, something that asked questions. I didn't tell Clayton about the phone call right away, but he noticed something had shifted in me. Clayton notices most things. It's part of what makes him good at his work. He can look at a broken machine and tell you where the real problem is, not just the obvious symptom. You look like a man who's got something turning over in his head, he said one morning in early October, not looking up from a carburetor. Just tired, I said. He didn't push. 2 days later, he mentioned the car. Dark blue Chevy Malibu Georgia plates rental sticker on the bumper, parked across from your house when I drove by yesterday morning. Still there at noon, gone by evening. He set down his rag. I drive past your street on the way to the parts supplier. Noticed it Tuesday too. Could be visiting someone in the neighborhood, I said. Could be, he said. Driver never got out. That afternoon, I looked up the phone number for the Alabama Education Association's supplemental insurance program. I'd seen the policy name on some of Opal's paperwork and had always assumed Bradley had handled the claim completely. The woman on the phone was patient. She asked for the policy number, which I didn't have, so she looked up the account by Opal's social security number and date of death. She put me on hold for 4 minutes. Sir, I'm showing the death benefit was paid in full in May of last year. The wire transfer went to a trust account designated by the estate representative. What was the benefit amount? A pause. Are you the listed beneficiary on the policy? I believe so. My name is Jerome Lattimore. My wife was Opal Lattimore. Another pause longer. Sir, the face value of this policy is $200,000. That's the amount that was disbursed. I asked her to repeat the number. She did. 200,000, not 58. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after I hung up. Then I opened the closet in the second bedroom, where I'd put a cardboard box of estate paperwork the day after Bradley left, a box I had never once opened. The next morning I told Clayton everything. He listened without interrupting, a habit of his I'd come to appreciate. When I finished, he asked one question. Do you still have all the paperwork from when your son handled the estate? We spread it across his workbench that afternoon, drop cloth laid down to keep things clean. Bradley's attorney had left me copies of everything. A summary of accounts, the probate court filing, some hospital billing statements, and a document labeled Estate Settlement Acknowledgement with my signature at the bottom. Clayton read slowly. He's not a lawyer, but he is a man who has spent 30 years figuring out where things don't fit. This hospital bill, he said, holding up a page. Memorial Medical Center, $61,200. But the billing address is a P.O. box in Alpharetta, Georgia. Memorial Medical is in Gadsden. Why is their billing going to a suburb of Atlanta? I didn't know. And look at this. He laid 2 documents side by side. This summary says the insurance benefit was $112,000, but the company just told you it was $200,000. Bradley told me 58, I said. Clayton looked at me steadily. Jerome, I think you need to go to the probate court yourself. Not with your son, not with his attorney. Just you. and pull the original filing. We went first thing the following morning. The clerk found the Lattimore estate file in under 5 minutes. The original filing showed everything correctly. $200,000 in life insurance proceeds, property, and savings. But attached behind it was an amended filing submitted 6 weeks after I'd signed the acknowledgement. It cited new debts, coordination expenses, and legal fees totaling $142,000. All of it billed to an LLC called Lattimore Estate Solutions, registered in the state of Georgia. I had never heard of Lattimore Estate Solutions. Clayton photographed every page. On the drive back down Meridian Street, we didn't say much. When he parked in front of the shop and turned off the engine, he sat with his hands in his lap for a moment. "He created a company in your family's name," Clayton said. "Billed your wife's estate $142,000 and got you to sign off on it during the worst weeks of your life." I looked out the windshield at the street where I walked every morning. He said he was looking out for me. "That's why it worked," Clayton said. "People who mean to take from you rarely say so out loud." The blue Malibu came back on a Friday, 2 weeks after we'd been to the courthouse. It was parked across the street when I walked past on my morning route. 2 men inside, neither of them Bradley. I kept walking to Clayton's shop and told him what I'd seen. He listened, then handed me his phone. "Call your son," he said. "Tell him you've been thinking about what he said, that you're open to talking about the house, the estate, whatever he wants to discuss. Make it sound like you're coming around." I understood what he was doing. I made the call. Bradley answered on the second ring, faster than he had in months. The warmth was immediate, almost theatrical. He said he was so glad I'd called, that he'd been worried, that he could drive up next week and we'd sit down together, go through everything, figure out what made the most sense for my future. "That'd be good," I said. "I just want to understand everything better." When I hung up, Clayton was watching the street through the shop window. The Malibu pulled away from the curb and was gone inside of 2 minutes. 3 days later, Clayton mentioned that his nephew works in the county tax assessor's office. His nephew had flagged that someone had been pulling the property records on my address twice in the past 30 days. Looking at the deed, the title history, the current market valuation. Bradley's name was on my deed. He'd put it there 2 years ago when I was still numb, telling me it was just for emergencies. He was planning to sell my house. I called an elder law attorney in Birmingham that same afternoon, found through the Alabama State Bar's referral service. She was experienced and calm in the way that people who have seen a great deal of cruelty can sometimes be. She reviewed the probate documents, the insurance records, the LLC filing, and my signed acknowledgement in a single 90-minute session. When she was done, she told me what we had and what it was called: elder financial abuse, a felony under Alabama code. The fabricated billing entity constituted wire fraud, which is federal. She contacted the insurance company directly to obtain the disbursement records. She filed a complaint with the Alabama Securities Commission. She sent a referral to the Georgia Real Estate Commission, where Bradley held his license. Then she told me what she wanted me to do. She wanted me to meet Bradley as planned, in a public place, and let him talk. The meeting was at the diner on 4th Street. Bradley arrived looking exactly like himself: pressed jacket, neat slacks, the watch Opal and I had given him for his 30th birthday. He smiled when he saw me and said I looked good, more like myself. Clayton was already in the booth directly behind where Bradley sat. He'd arrived 20 minutes before us, ordered coffee, and was reading a newspaper when Bradley walked in without glancing around. I kept my hands flat on the table and asked Bradley to explain what Lattimore Estate Solutions was. The smile left his face in stages, the way a tide goes out. For a moment he tried to say that estate administration involves complexity that's hard to explain without the right background. Then I laid out the numbers for him. $200,000 from the insurance company, $142,000 billed to his LLC, $58,000 the number he gave me, $15,000 the amount he actually put in my account. His jaw tightened. He said the estate had costs he'd managed on my behalf, that he deserved compensation for his time, that the documents I'd signed were legal. I told him I'd signed them 12 days after his mother died, while I was on 2 medications and sleeping 4 hours a night, while his lawyer sat at my kitchen table. Then he tried the only 2 moves he had left. The first was an offer. He'd repay a portion, a reasonable figure, if I agreed not to pursue it further. He mentioned that Sherry was expecting, that this would damage everything he'd built. The second was a threat. He'd file for conservatorship, claim I wasn't competent to manage my affairs, tie things up in probate court for years. I let him finish both. "Bradley," I said, "this conversation is being recorded. My attorney has the full disbursement records from the insurance company, the LLC registration documents, the original and amended probate filings, and a billing discrepancy of $142,000 with your name on every page. The Georgia Real Estate Commission received a complaint last week, and my attorney submitted a referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office yesterday regarding the wire transfers." He looked at me across the table like I was a stranger. Maybe I was, by then. Maybe he'd spent 2 years thinking of me as something to be managed, rather than someone who might eventually think clearly again. You should find yourself a lawyer, I said. A real one, not one of yours. I left money on the table for the coffee and walked out. The legal process took 11 months. Bradley surrendered his Georgia real estate license rather than face the full disciplinary hearing. He pled guilty to 1 count of elder financial abuse under Alabama law and 1 count of wire fraud in federal court. He received a suspended sentence with 3 years of supervised probation and a full restitution order for $142,000 plus statutory interest. His Atlanta condo sold for enough to cover the judgment with money left over. I didn't ask where he and Sherry went after that. I didn't send a card when the baby came. Some doors you close and don't open again, not out of hatred but out of clarity about what was on the other side. My roof was replaced in October. I paid the $16,000 in cash and never touched the rest. It sits in a money market account doing what money that was worked for honestly should do, growing slowly without drama. The hardest part wasn't the legal proceedings. It was the phone call from Opal's sister in Biloxi, who had always been fond of Bradley, who had watched him grow up alongside her nieces at Christmas dinners and summer visits. She called twice. The second time she asked, gently, whether I'd considered that Bradley might have been under enormous pressure, whether Opal would have wanted this outcome for the family. I told her that her sister spent 26 years teaching other people's children and 34 years building a life alongside me, and the least I could do was make sure that life wasn't picked clean by someone who decided grief was a business opportunity. She didn't call back after that, I understood, and I was all right. Clayton Phelps decided to retire the following spring. His knees had started objecting to the concrete floor, and his daughter had been on him about slowing down for 2 years. He called me one evening to mention it, said he wasn't sure what he'd do with himself, that 30 years of fixing engines had a way of becoming the only thing a man knows how to be. I told him about the garage. It's a detached 2-car, built solid in 1974, good electrical, more square footage than I need for yard equipment, and boxes of Opal's things I haven't had the heart to deal with. I told him I wasn't making an offer out of charity. I told him there's a difference between charity and recognizing what someone gave you and what he gave me. The morning coffee before I was ready to talk, the sharp eye on a rental car that didn't belong, the steady presence of someone who didn't need anything from me in return, was worth more than a garage bay. He moved his tools in on a Saturday in April. We spent the afternoon arguing about whether the radio should go on the north wall or the south wall. He brought the Mr. Coffee from the shop. I baked biscuits the night before, Opal's recipe, which still come out crooked. He parks his truck in the driveway now on the mornings he comes. I hear him come in through the side door and start the coffee, and I get up and we sit at the kitchen table for a while before either of us starts anything. We talk about what needs doing in the yard, the weather coming in off the ridge, whether the diner on 4th Street has gotten any better. It hasn't, but we keep going back. My son took $142,000 from me. He took 2 years of believing I was nearly broke, that I was fragile, that my roof and my future were problems I had no business trying to solve. He took the money his mother spent 26 years earning in a classroom full of children who still sent her cards. He couldn't take this. The coffee at 7 in the morning, the biscuits on Tuesday, the man who noticed a car parked too long on a street where it had no business because he drove past my house every single day and understood what ordinary looked like. I spent 2 years thinking I had nothing. Turns out I just hadn't found what I had yet.